Hey there, gang. It's Dr. Deb, and it's Thursday night, so I am here to speak with you. I realize I did not get out the note very early, so if not that many people show up, I forgive you, but I can only do so much. So tonight we're going to talk about an impossible to save marriage, or almost impossible, and why I think it's not so impossible. And when you do get on, I would love for you to chat, and you can also chat in the comments afterwards, so it's okay too. 3 things to do to save my marriage when it seems impossible. And I want you to understand something. A person could go to therapy for years and not get there. So how could I be giving you something that's so easy in a speech? Well, the answer is, believe it or not, that you, the listener right here, have more power in the marriage than you think. Let me make up a story. Supposing somebody is in an unhappy marriage and a woman says her husband has been cheating. What power does she have? Well, perhaps there's something that she could do differently that she isn't doing. So she says, no, I have tried everything. I've begged. I've pleaded. I've cried. I've reasoned. Nothing works. Well, guess what, folks? That's why it's not working. Begging, crying, pleading, and reasoning are not attractive, not sexually attractive, and not emotionally attractive. So when a person tells me they've tried everything and then they tell me these are the standard 4: begging, crying, pleading, and reasoning, that's not what you have to do. Whether your spouse is drinking too much, or your spouse is cheating, or you think they're cheating, and you want to save the marriage and you don't know what's going on, none of these 4 things will work. My suggestion is to look at yourself and the power that you have. Now, I want to say it's really hard for me to do a live when people aren't here. And because of it, this one's going to be short because without questions and comments, this is just going to be short. So I'm going to rattle off for you the 3 things that you can do. You're here. Thank you. Good. So the 3 things that you can do, and I was just saying, I guess you tuned in a bit later than I started. Please comment so that I'm not going to be all done in 5 minutes, because it's easy enough to wrap it up in 5 minutes. But I was making up a fictitious argument by someone. Well, Dr. Deb, if it was so easy to fix, then why don't people just fix it? Why are there so many bad marriages that don't get saved? Why is it people can go to therapy for years and it doesn't work? And the answer is because each person does not look at what they are doing to contribute to the problem. Anything one person does, another person is going to react to. It's perfectly normal to be a reactor. I was just speaking to a guy, a lovely guy. His wife is lovely too, but they cannot have a conversation because each one gets triggered and then they're off to the races with a fight. Now, things have gotten better. But really and truly, it takes guts for each person to look at themselves. And I was just saying, people say, but I've tried everything. I've begged, I've pleaded, I've reasoned, and I've cried. And I'm just saying, those are not attractive qualities that will draw a spouse to you who's been keeping a distance emotionally, whether they're fighting or they go numb and don't say anything, or they're cheating, or they're drinking, or whatever other methods of escape they're using. They're not connected to you. To make that connection, you have to be safe. So if you're crying, what does that mean? It means they did something wrong, right? Otherwise, why would you crying? So actually, to them, if you're crying, you're blaming them for hurting you. Now, they don't like that. Even if it's true, you can't do it. If you're pleading with them to change, that means that they have some power over you that they didn't even know they had. It makes you weak and not respect worthy, and it frightens the dickens out of them because they don't want to have a power that they don't even know about. And they really don't. Most of these people are clueless. In a marriage that's going wrong, one or two people are clueless as to why it's going wrong. So begging doesn't help because they don't know what to do different. Begging and pleading. And then we have reasoning. Reasoning. Well, if you would only do this, I would feel safe. There's a couple of problems with reasoning. When the receiving person is upset, they can't hear reasoning. They can't think straight. They can't get reasoning through their head. That's one problem. The other problem is, what if they have different reasons? What if the reason you're giving for what you want doesn't jive with what they want? You know, I once worked with a couple. This is amazing. I once worked with a couple that ended up getting a divorce because the wife was a normal, neat person, and he was, the husband, a slob, and he couldn't stand her reminding him that he left crumbs on the kitchen counter. So she was kind of reasoning with him, but the crumbs will bring ants, and maybe the food will spoil, and she had all kinds of reasons. He doesn't want to hear the reasons because his personality, after they got divorced, he told me, you know, Dr. Deb, I got in my car and I dropped old sandwiches on the floor without picking them up and throwing them in the garbage, and it felt so good. It felt like a release. Now, this guy is going over the top, but then again, she was. Really? The crumbs are going to make a marriage go bad down the tubes? Obviously, there was more. But if a person is going to start reasoning without hearing what the other person's position on whatever it is, it's not going to work. So what are my 3 things that I'm going to advise you to do? The first is to stop reasoning. Never reason. I also just told this to a mother who can't say no to her children, but they're very rude and very disrespectful. And yet, when they want something, she gives them all kinds of logical reasons why they can't have it instead of just saying no, and then they get angry. Curiosity is important. Curiosity is very important. But how do you mean this in where I was just going? I need a little more clarification. Curiosity is great, but if the person you're reasoning with isn't curious to hear your reasons, it's not going to show up right there unless you mean something different. Okay, the husband and wife. Chatting can be annoying on YouTube. It would be so much nicer if people could just chime in, right? And that's what Zoom does, but then Zoom is too restricted in who's going to be able to watch it later on. Engaging with each other need to be curious. Well, okay, but let's say your feelings are hurt and you want your spouse to know that your feelings are hurt. If you explain to them why your feelings are hurt when they never asked you, they don't have the curiosity. So your reasoning is not going to be going anywhere. You know, curiosity is, I guess I would say, an elevated art. It's an art for two people who can remain curious about each other and where the other is coming from, instead of being focused on only their argument and their point and how they feel. And it's tricky, right? It's tricky. So I'm just speaking to the one person who shows up here, whoever that is, all my YouTube viewers, rather than the spouse that's not here. You can be curious about them, and maybe that'll work. But one thing that you must stop doing is sharing information that they don't want to hear. There is a rule. An upset person can't receive. So if you say to your spouse, you hurt my feelings and here's what you did, they're already not going to listen because they're upset now because they feel blamed and attacked. And inside their gut is probably twisting into a knot. Is the reason they are focused on themselves because of their own wounds? Yeah, it could be. And anything you say, like you want, like, if only you would say hello with a smile when you walk in the door. Now, that seems like a very reasonable thing to ask. But if you say it while you're crying or pleading or begging, well, that's, I guess, the same as pleading, or reasoning. If you try to reason your way through something like this, they're going to feel it's blame. They did something wrong. So if they have an old wound, this is a new wound on top of the old wound. They can't hear it anymore. So the first thing, I beg everyone out there listening, not just the person who got on here very nicely to chat with me, but in the future, going forward, whoever tunes into this, don't reason. Just pretend there's tape over your mouth. Reasoning when you want something that they did wrong, you want them to change their behavior, reasoning is just as bad as crying and pleading. Don't do it. That is thing number one. They cannot receive it. Furthermore, there's more to it than that. When one person reasons with another, it implies, I'm so logical and you're not. That's not very good either. If you want something out of the other person, you have to show them respect, right? I'm logical and you're not? Oh, come on. That's never going to fly. So, number one, don't reason. Fascinating. Isn't it interesting? When we are more healed, we can sit with the discomfort of the discussion and receive the message. Yes, sure. And that takes two people who are in what I, as an IFS practitioner, called a little more self-energy, rather than having one's defenses up because one feels blamed or criticized. You know, the worst thing we can do to a child is shame them. And when a shamed child grows up and gets married, any little taste of that is going to hurt and it's going to trigger. So no more reasoning. And the second thing I mentioned already, stop crying. Because when you cry, it is blaming. I know it's not blaming. It's normal to cry. You go and watch a sad movie, you cry. You go to a funeral, you cry. You hear bad news, you cry. It's normal to cry. But when you cry to the person who hurt you, with the implication that they hurt you, those tears turn into blame. And I've heard from so many people that they cry, it turns into blame. There's another piece to this too. Crying demonstrates vulnerability, your vulnerability, which can be very scary to another person. Because if you're vulnerable, then the person listening to you feels the pressure is on them to handle you very carefully, and they don't know what to do and they can't do it. They'd rather shut down. They feel blamed, and now they also feel scared because they've got to handle you with kid gloves since you're so vulnerable. And there's a third problem, which is, there's a certain tit for tat in this society. If you walk outside your door and some person passes you on the street and says good morning, you're going to say good morning. I know in New York, nobody does that. When I was a kid and I moved from my first graduate school to Des Moines, Iowa, the first day I got there, I'm walking on the street and someone said good morning. And I'm like, how is it possible that they know me? How could they know? Of course, they didn't know me. They were just being friendly because that's what they do in the Midwest, not in New York. But the point is, in places where it's done, they say good morning, you say good morning. It's normal. There's an exchange. So if you're vulnerable by crying, they have to be vulnerable, and they're scared to do that. That's terrifying to some people. So don't reason and don't cry. Now, here's another rule. This is the rule I gave you before, but here's another application of it. The rule is upset people cannot receive. So this is why you can't reason. But you can't even have a normal conversation about something important with someone who is upset. Even if you're not trying to reason, even if you say, I just want to share some concerns I have about sending our daughter to such and such college. I'll just make that up. It's a reasonable thing to want to have a conversation about that. You're not reasoning with them. You want to have a conversation. And if for any reason something you said in that conversation will trigger your listener in any way, they can no longer receive. People hear only when they're relaxed and receptive. I mean, if they're relaxed, they could be also tuning you out. But for sure, when they're upset or triggered in any way, frightened, angry, whatever upset them, they cannot have a normal conversation because they literally won't hear. Exactly. A person must feel safe. So I had a conversation happen in front of my eyes with someone, a couple, where the wife said to the husband, I'm really upset about X, but I have to give you a compliment about Y. And she went on a little bit to explain what was concerning her. Do you know the husband admitted after the dust settled, because he shut down, he admitted that he never even heard the words, "But I have to compliment you about why." All he heard was the complaints, the ex, and he shut down. He can't receive. Sometimes you cannot give the love sandwich. That's the point. I think it's good, but it may not work. Now, there's a variation on this. I know that ice cream alone without proteins in your diet and vegetables and fruits is not a good diet. However, when it comes to a marriage in which a person has been so sensitized that they know you're going to criticize them, even if you start with a compliment, they know the criticism is coming. The best thing to do is to surprise them by not having the criticism at all. And the love sandwich is love, love, and love, rather than love, criticism, and some more love. And that might have to go on for a long time, many, many months. So then the person can say, well, we're not having a real relationship. I'm not sharing what's bothering me. I'm sweeping all this dust under the carpet and I'm miserable. Yeah, that may be true. And I'm going to say right now, as true as that may be, the fact is you may have to live with that if you want the marriage to turn around. Imagine someone in the hospital, your lover, your best. Well, it's abnormal. It's a not normal situation. It's a little anxiety provoking. It's unhappy. It's a miserable thing. What are you going to do? If they are in the hospital, they are in the hospital. That's exactly what the situation is. You can't do anything about it. This is the same thing. Considering the person who was wounded previously in their life before they ever met you, still wounded. I'll tell you something on that. Does that mean you simply accept your disappointment? Well, let's say like this. If you got your spouse to a place where they were happy with you and felt, as you said, safe because you didn't criticize, there might be an ability for them to actually have a conversation with you down the line. So do you then give yourself empathy? Of course. Self-compassion and empathy? Of course. You should always do that every day of the week. You know, I have a cousin who's quite elderly. I haven't seen her in about 3 or 4 years. And because she lives on the other side of the country. And we had this really long talk just like a week ago. Do you know she was focused on bad stuff that happened to her as a child? She's elderly. The conversation turned and that came up. And guess what? Every time we talk, that happens. The wound is so bad, it just takes up so much space in a person's psyche that there's not much room for anything else. Which is why what also you can do, I gave you 3 things, but I'll give you another one. Let the person who you wish would get help listen to these lives so that they could see that I am not going to be blaming or critical. However, the truth is, if they live outside of New York, I can't do therapy with them. All I can do is a coaching program that I created that's not really therapy. So the other option, if they really should get therapy, is for me to recommend somebody in your state, which I have a directory of people that from all the states that have gone through the same kinds of program that I've gone through and have the same love of working this way. So I can't swear that those people are going to be the same as me. We're all different human beings, but at least they'll approach helping in a non-blaming way, because that's the most important thing. Somebody told me today, just today, their son needed to see a person that I recommended, not for therapy, but for medication. And somebody I thought was a very nice guy. And apparently, when the kid came in, he said, "Why'd you wait so long to get help?" And I'm like, "Oh no, they didn't do that, did they? That's horrible. That is horrible." So I said I didn't know that he would be like that. I thought he was a really nice guy, which that was the person I knew. Okay, so that's the problem there. And I can't swear that everybody on that list is going to be kind and gentle and non-critical or non-criticizing, but I hope so. So my basic summary here is: don't beg and plead, don't reason, and don't cry. Be nice, be kind, and yes, give yourself the love and compassion and everything you need for yourself. The friendship, the conversations that can be wonderful, you won't get yet, and you might not get them. That's just the reality of this person that you're with. But at least you won't make things worse. Does that help? Does that answer your question? Look, I believe in therapy myself. I'm a therapist. I believe in it. It should definitely be on consideration. You're welcome. Take care.